Welcome to A Really Good Sex Chat, a podcast aiming to open up conversations about disability and sexuality. I'm your host, Candice Care-Unger, psychosexual therapist and specialist social worker at Care Rehab. Join us as we have frank conversations about sexuality, disability, fertility, pleasure, dating, and everything in between. This podcast is brought to you by Care Rehab and recorded on Darug land. In this episode of A Really Good Sex Chat, we're talking with Rachel Wotton about sex work. She talks about a number of great resources, and you will find those links in the show notes for this episode. But for now, let's just get into the chat. Good morning, Rachel. Hello. Lovely to see you today. How are you going?
I'm good, thanks. Lovely to be here.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us on A Really Good Sex Chat. So we have a chance today to chat about all things disability, sexuality, and sex work. That's why you've come to be on our podcast today. So for those that don't know you, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm currently on Gadigal land, which is part of the Eora Nation, which is commonly known as being part of the inner west of Sydney. And I've been a sex worker for well over 2 decades now. And I've worked in different parts of Australia and different parts overseas. And I guess where I've become more well known is in that I provide services to all sorts of clients, including lots of different people with disability. I've also worked or been a volunteer person for the state organisation, sex worker organisation SWAP, Sex Workers Outreach Project of New South Wales. I was also the international spokesperson for 5 years for Scarlet Alliance, the Australian sex worker organisation. And I was a co-founder and part of Touching Base for 20 years, serving different roles, including the last one, which was the training coordinator.
Lots of diverse roles. I'm always surprised how organised sex workers are, like in terms of advocacy and agencies and activism. What's your thoughts on that? Where's the roots of organised sex work? It's not independent people just doing their own thing off by themselves. There's a real community.
Yeah, it's a bit of that dichotomy. No one trusts sex workers to be a part of the financial or decision-making processes of organisations, and yet that is the integral part of our business. We have communication skills, we have service provision, service delivery, we look after our money, we learn how to get paid, we do lots of different things with advertising, and advocacy and organisation within the structures of organisations for sex workers is an extension of both peer education, so supporting each other to become more empowered and confident and skilled in providing the best quality services for our clients, but also it comes from the fact that we need to advocate for our rights, our labour rights, our health and safety rights, and anti-discrimination laws need to be applied throughout Australia, which currently is only in a few different states, so that we're treated equally. Sex work is real work, and the term sex work came about in the 1970s through Carol Lee, also known as Scarlet Harlot. And since then, we have been advocating in all different countries around the world for equal rights. In Australia, sex work is a legally recognised occupation, and it is regulated differently in different states and territories. So in New South Wales, we work under a decriminalised framework, and that has now been introduced into Northern Territory, into Victoria, and most recently Queensland.
That's
On the
such
1st
good
of
news.
August 2024, it will come into effect. Yes. And New Zealand brought it in 2003 throughout the whole country, and sex workers around the world are advocating for this. And part of decriminalisation is allowing us to operate and to be recognised equally as other occupations without extra prejudice, without extra discrimination. And in Australia, the reason why we can have these wonderful conversations about sex workers providing services to people with disability is because I'm not fearful of being arrested, being charged, being followed by the police. I have legal access to different laws, so someone can't stand over me, someone can't blackmail me. Even if someone steals my wallet in public, I don't feel so scared going to the police now because they ask, "What's your name? Where do you live? What do you do?"
Mm.
And I feel empowered enough and I have the legal rights to be able to be supported. Decriminalisation allows us to have these open conversations, and it allows us to be able to advertise, and it allows third-party support systems like support workers, therapists like yourself, medical personnel, family members to be able to also talk openly to the individual they may be supporting who wants to access sex work services, and to be able to talk openly of what the person's needs are and not to be fearful about being involved in this process. So in Australia, specifically in New South Wales where I am now, we're very fortunate and everyone should support decriminalisation.
Absolutely. I think there's this, you would know the definition from the World Health Organization around, sexuality and how it's influenced by legal, cultural, political issues, plus many other things. And whenever I'm teaching, I always bring attention to that because, I'm teaching and working in New South Wales. And so some of the interventions that we might suggest to clients are legal here. But if I was working in other parts of the world, maybe they wouldn't be one of the interventions or tools just based on the legal framework in which we're trying to work. So I have obviously had the lovely opportunity to work with you for a number of years now, and we've shared lots of clients together, do some research work together, do lots of teaching and training, and you're a jack of all trades in many regards because yes, you had the 20 years of sex work. But I think one of the cool things that many people don't realize is you also did a Churchill Scholarship. Do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about, because you're the first sex worker to get a Churchill Scholarship. So tell us, first of all, what's a Churchill Scholarship and what did you learn whilst you were away?
Sure. So my experience in the sex industry is edging closer to 30 years, not 20,
Ooh, yeah,
which
okay,
does
sorry.
age me a bit. I try not to say how many years just because some people, when Scarlet Road, the documentary I was a
Yeah.
part of, was released, of course, it takes many years for the production of the film to end up on big screen. But there were some very concerned clients that were writing to me and tried to do the maths about my age. And when I started in the sex industry, so I had to say, oh, sometimes our age is slightly different, or sometimes due to the
Yeah.
delay of when things get released. So I kind of just say more than 2 decades or nearly 3 decades of experience now. So
but no one
yes,
needs to
I
worry.
was
You weren't sex working at 5.
no,
But,
no. I started when I was 20 years old, paid for my undergraduate degree, which was in psychology, actually.
and that's how you came into it?
I was always interested in the sex industry, and at the time going through high school and then into university, I always wanted to work with people and to empower people. I actually didn't know about social work at the time, so I chose psychology and I really enjoyed psychology, but retrospectively, I think a social work degree would have been really rewarding as well. But I
Yeah.
kind of got here in the end anyway. So I really love working with allied health, such as yourself, to mutually support our clients' sexual needs.
Yep.
And yeah, being able to utilize my skills in terms of the graduate diploma in sexual health counseling, my master's in research, and now currently my PhD. So I feel very honoured that the Australian Churchill Fellowship Trust did support my application. I encourage anyone who is interested in the Churchill Fellowship to definitely go onto their website and have a look. I've certainly given some more information to other people in my life who were interested. And essentially, it's designed for everyday Australians who are focused on specific issues to be able to have the opportunity to go overseas, to be able to share knowledge, learn about different applications to issues, and to learn more about their topic and to bring that information back to Australia and be able to share that with the community that they work with or serve or interact with. And I know that it's still it out there to support an open sex worker. So I'm really proud that they had that conversation and ultimately they did support me. I traveled to a number of different countries. My report can be found on my website, rachelwotton.com. It's open access. Obviously, due to the nature of the different discussions that I have, it's a kind of a summary, but I always write things so that people can learn more. So all of the contact details for organisations or specific businesses that I interacted with are at the back of the report, and as much information as possible. So essentially, it was around what kind of training has been provided to sex workers who provide services to clients with disability. But the extension of my research actually included speaking to a lot of different people who work with sexual assistants. Now, there are different modalities around the world where people with disability can be supported to explore their sexual expression. So it's kind of in a more therapeutic model. And I do need to precurse this that obviously there are millions of people with disability who are married, who are
Mm.
dating, who are parents, who absolutely do not need or want the services of a sex worker or any other therapeutic support around their sexual needs. So I always try to say that because this is about a choice, mutually consenting adult behaviour between two or more people, one who is providing certain different services and the other person who is willing to pay for those services. And there's lots of different motivational factors for why people may want to do this. But it's interesting because every different country has kind of approached it in different ways. So lots of people know about the film that Helen Hunt was in called The Sessions, and that explored sexual surrogacy. It's also called sexual partner therapy as well.
Mm.
There's a couple of different terms now for it, but essentially it came out of a Masters and Johnson therapeutic clinic in America, and there are a number of sexual surrogacy clinics and individual sexual surrogates who operate in America. And that's also been extended to Israel, funny enough,
Mm. Yeah.
in Europe. And so this is very therapeutically based, and it's not just for people with disabilities. So sexual surrogacy is essentially when someone has specific issues. It could be around learning how to become more intimate, erectile dysfunction, not knowing how to engage or to interact with the opposite sex, maybe exploring same-sex desires. There's a whole range of reasons why people may want to see a sexual surrogate, and it's often in a very static, triangulated model where there's a sexual surrogate that does the hands-on work with the client, and then there's the therapist who's doing the talk therapy, and there's open communication. In Europe,
Mhm.
there are a number of sexual assistant services that have popped up. They're all very different in how they operate, and I got to speak to a number of different sexual surrogacy organisations during my Churchill Fellowship. They work specifically with people with disability. Sometimes sex workers are sexual assistants, but there's a
Mhm.
number of differences between actually sex work per se and the sexual assistance. And the accumulation of my knowledge that I gained from the Churchill Fellowship ended up in a book chapter in the Routledge Handbook of Disability and Sexuality, and it's edited by Russell Shuttleworth and Linda Mona. And the book chapter you can see on my website as well, and it's titled Paid Sexual Services for People with Disability, Exploring the Range and Modalities Offered Throughout the World. So I go through the similarities and differences between how sex work operates in different countries, sexual assistance, sexual surrogacy, and there's a couple of countries that provide either paid or volunteer masturbatory services. You can't see my face right now, but I'm not a fan.
Why are you
But
not a
it's all
fan?
written in there. I'm not a fan because, one, it's not inclusive. So they only focus on medical masturbation essentially for people who own a penis. So
Uh-huh.
it's not for all genders. It's also very clinical. So it's one-way touch. So from what I've established is that it's nearly like, I'm not sure if I can say this, but it's nearly like kitty wank or pity fuck, really. I don't think that it's very inclusive, and it doesn't embody the whole person holistically, and it doesn't give people choice. So I've heard one person say, well, no one's complained. And I'm like, something is better than nothing for any kind of touch. So, it's like you don't bite the hand that feeds you. If that's the only touch you get, there's also really clear boundaries. So one of the organizations that was operating, I think, would only allow 5 sessions, and that's it. Imagine only having another human being touch you in any kind of intimate way 5 times in your whole life.
Mm.
And then someone who you don't know goes, "No, that's it for you." So I don't think it's very inclusive.
Mhm.
And also there's sex workers. There are
Yeah.
other options where people can explore a whole different range of services and touch and enjoyment. And so that's one of the problems when people don't recognize sex work as a viable option for people to explore their sexual expression, then it's just able-bodied people telling people with disability what they should enjoy and what they should need without being person-centered and asking the individuals what they would like to try. And
Mm. And I guess what I'm hearing is also that there's like a variety of different practices happening around the world with different language and different definition of what they're actually
Mm.
doing. And I've noticed in Australia, sometimes it can get a bit muddy in the waters. Like,
In the
people
water.
interchange sex work, sexual surrogacy, touch therapy, which is a new one. Why are we dancing around calling it what we call it in
Mhm.
Australia? And so, from what I've learned from you, it's like sex work is what we call it in Australia. So, let's not start confusing the
Yeah.
space by calling it random versions of other things that
Mm.
may or may not exist in other countries around the world.
Yeah. I think part of the muddying of the waters came from the magistrate who gave the AAT ruling for the woman with MS
Yeah.
who took the NDIS to the tribunal. And she won that, but the public ruling given by that magistrate really muddied the waters. So even though privately all of the topic and all of the conversations and all of the reports mentioned sex work, for some weird reason, this magistrate decided to call it specialized sex therapy. So everyone was up in arms. The therapists, when it came out, were like, we don't touch our clients.
Yeah.
Myself as a sex worker, I'm like, I may provide different kind of therapeutic services, but I'm a sex worker. I'm getting paid to provide sexual services. Don't call me anything else. This is a
Mm.
legally recognized occupation in Australia. So it was all over the place. So luckily, the NDIS shot themselves in the foot because they didn't want to pay the relatively small amount of money to this woman. And so they took it to the federal court, and then they lost because the 3 magistrates at the federal court level gave a public ruling looking at all the evidence and said, no, this is sex work. And sex
Yeah.
workers are in the best position to be able to provide the range of services that this woman has articulated that she needs and wants for all these reasons, and that we learn best when we're interacting with their clients. So it's a really beautiful ruling. You wouldn't normally say, read a federal court, you know, position or ruling, but it's actually really well written, and it really supports what a lot of us have been saying for years, that
Yeah.
a lot of us are very skilled and experienced and happy and willing to provide services to a whole range of diverse clients, including people with disability. And I know the visual image is always about someone who utilizes a wheelchair. However, we know that there's a lot of people with invisible or dynamic disabilities as well. And certainly that's what my research has discovered and started to bring it into the academic sphere to
Yeah.
show that people with disability in Australia are as diverse as the whole society. And some
Yeah.
people want to see sex workers and some people don't. And the range of services that people want are as diverse as society as well. Well, first of all, professionally, I know that there are so many different desires from my clients,
Yeah.
and I provide services to such a broad range of clients and broad range of disabilities that you could never, see people with cerebral palsy. It's like, well, that means nothing because, as we know, cerebral palsy presents very differently in each individual body. So everyone has different ways to communicate and different
Mm.
ways of how they mobilize their body and different desires.
We say the same thing in brain injury. You met one person with a brain injury, you've met one person with a brain injury. The same thing with spinal cord injury. You've met
Mm.
one person. Like every disability is so unique and so complex and so specific that, we can't just say, oh, with a broad brush, people with disability, and that all means the same thing.
I was just going to say that's one of the reasons I really still enjoy my job is that every individual client is unique and I always learn something new from each person, whether it's one of their hobbies or how to better communicate with someone, or people have different things they want to try sexually, or we may go to the theatre, and so I get to see a different performance. I get to go to different parts of Sydney or different places around Australia. So I'm always learning from my clients, and some of that's specifically related to their disability, and sometimes it's just specifically related to them as an individual, and that's why I like the diversity of my job.
I can understand that. Having worked with people now for 20 something years, I agree. Like every day's different, every person's different. And that's kind of what keeps it interesting. There's no repetition happening. So, Rachel, you decided to do a PhD. Can you tell me, first of all, why? Why would you go down this pathway? What's motivated you? And what are you looking at?
Well, first of all, my PhD has a very long name called Exploring the Experiences of People with Disability Who Access Sex Work Services in Australia. I've shortened that to just call it the PASA Research Study.
Okay.
And on the designated website page, I've worked hard with a graphic designer to create imagery to assist people to recognise the PASA research, and also it's not so dry for people to be able to relate to it a little bit. So there's lots of information about that on the website, and it will also be in the thesis. Why did I do it? Oh, well, one of the reasons is that the NDIS, specifically through that process with the woman with MS who won her case, and every other tribunal and every other media outlet keeps saying, there's no evidence, there's no evidence. And so I thought, well, bugger you, I'll create some evidence. I
Yeah.
wanted to create a platform for people with disability to have their voices heard and recognised and to be highlighted as experts in their own lives. The NDIS makes people spend thousands of dollars on reports by multiple allied health support systems to determine whether or not they should, whether it's reasonable or necessary for them to be able to explore their sexual expression with the expert, which is the sex worker, to be able to assist them on that journey. Instead of just saying, what is it that you need? Well, this is the kind of service provider that will be able to assist you in this, and then check back in and say, is this working for you? Let's manage your expectations. Other things that we need to change. But no, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on external people making the determination instead of the individual. I also know that through my own personal experience of being a professional who's providing these services, through thousands of conversations with sex workers over the years, and through my interactions with my clients, there was lots of discussions around, wouldn't it be good if people believed us? Wouldn't it be good if these stories could be told? My master's by research, which is also available freely online, actually did speak to New South Wales sex workers who provide services to clients with disability. And that was also done because I wanted to bring anecdotal evidence into the mainstream academic focus, because somehow that gets more believed by government officials and therapists and policymakers. So I utilised the avenue of being at uni to be able to create data that would be believed. First of all, people in positions of power in the government and the policymakers were like, I don't believe this is happening. I don't think this is a need. So my master's really showed that it was happening. It wasn't just happening in metropolitan areas. The findings do show that it happens in rural and regional areas. It identified a number of different barriers, obviously, in terms of it's a lot more difficult to find sex workers or to be able to interact privately. There's less sex workers going to rural and regional areas for a number of different reasons. But it did show even then about the full diversity of services that people with disability were paying for, which was a bit of
Yeah.
an eye-opener to people, because if you even get through the hoops of getting someone to believe that a person with disability is not asexual and that they do want to explore different sexual activities, we have to get them away from being heteronormative. So people start going to the men. Oh, so what kind of female sex worker do you
Yeah.
want? So, and I'm always quick to say, have you made sure that they actually do want someone with breasts or with a vagina? You know, have you ever thought that maybe they want someone who also has a penis? You know,
Yes.
I wanted to build on my master's, so I had spoken with sex workers. I did it in New South Wales because at the time it was the only state or territory in Australia that had decriminalisation as its
Yep.
legal framework, and it was an online survey. So I wanted to extend that. And like I said, I like people with disability to tell me and tell everyone what their experiences were. There had never been a platform for people to do it. And I'd been asking lots of my clients for a long time, would this be something that you'd be interested in? Is this something that you would support? Do you think this is good? And it was a resounding yes.
You had the confidence going into it knowing that, one, you'd be able to recruit a sample size that's going to actually be useful
Mm,
for a PhD, and that you knew the
mm,
issue. And I think this is like the heart and soul of PhD work, right? Like, know the issue,
mm,
know the conversation so you can contribute to it and advance it. And who better to do that than
mm.
someone who's living, working, breathing the conversation and knows exactly where literature needs to go and where the research needed to go.
I totally agree with what you were saying, is that I approached my PhD as an insider, but also as an outsider. An insider because I intimately understand the processes between clients and sex workers and understand the terminology, the layout of how the sex industry operates throughout Australia in different states and territories. I understand the advertising platforms and the nuances and the terms that clients may use and some of the difficulties. Obviously, as an outsider, as not a person with disability who has paid for sexual services, but I do feel that the participants, both the online survey participants and the 27 individuals that I did in-depth interviews with, trusted me to be open and to be honest, and weren't fearful that they would insult me or horrify me by what they were sharing, because I already had that insider understanding as a sex worker. And it was something that I did reassure every participant who I interviewed, that it was okay, that I wanted the good, the bad, the ugly. I didn't just want you to rave about your sex worker. Did want participants to share the barriers and the problems and the issues they may have experienced, because we can't learn together to get better at providing services unless we know what the experiences that people had.
Yeah. So for you, being at the near tail end, the painful end of right up, but nearly there, I know that you've sort of done a bit of a
Yeah.
deep dive into your data and you're living and breathing it. What are you learning? What's motivating people to seek sex work at this point in time in Australia?
Well, I found about 8 different motivational pathways for my participants, and some of them really align with the literature more broadly in academia around generally what clients do and the reasons why they seek sex workers. Obviously, it's not released yet. Hopefully, I will submit later this year, and hopefully by next year, people will be able to read the dissertation. But for now, there's 8 motivational areas that I've
Mm.
looked at, and they include sexual enjoyment, a desire for sexual variety, to combat loneliness and feelings of isolation, to seek genuine intimacy and connectivity. For some people, there was a lack of other sexual outlets or opportunities. For many participants, it was to increase sexual literacy. And then there were two other specific ones that more closely relate sometimes to a person's disability, which was utilising the sex work services for therapeutic healing and for recovery rehabilitation reasons. So I can
And
expand on them if you'd like to.
yeah, well, I was going to say that definitely
Yeah.
like mirrors kind of what I see professionally and clinically, like, as to why people might start to ask or be curious about what role sex work might provide them in terms of their achieving their goals. But I particularly want to talk to you about therapeutic healing, if that's okay. I just want to talk a little bit about what you've understood that to be, what participants are saying
Mhm.
that looks like. Can you elaborate a little bit more?
They obviously interchange a little bit. So therapeutic healing and also recovery and rehabilitation, probably two of the areas that you'd be
Yeah.
talking to your clients a lot.
Yeah.
So therapeutic healing came about when a number of participants spoke about how they had emerged from toxic relationships or they had experienced sexual assault previously in their life. Yeah, lots of different types of sexual assault, rape, negative experiences that they wanted to address. And they wanted to be in a safe, supported, and controlled environment to be able to explore good touch and
Mm.
to see how their body reacted to that touch. Their sexual expression and desires were still there, even though they were still processing and working through these really awful negative experiences previously in their life. And so sex work services actually provides this safe environment because a participant said, I feel in control. I can
Mm.
choose what I wanted to do. And the sex worker respected my boundaries and would stop when I would say to stop. They were skilled in being able to provide touch and support and services that I felt comfortable with. They were also there to be able to try new things. That was really wonderful. One, that people trusted me with
Mm.
these experiences and wanted to elaborate on the reasons why they saw sex workers. And it was very empowering for the participants to be able to do this. I felt that within all these 8 motivational factors, increasing one's confidence was something resoundingly came through in the findings and
Mm.
through people's voices. And the same with recovery and rehabilitation. There were a number of different people with spinal cord injuries and other injuries that had affected how they interact with the world now. So pre and post injury, some people were very sexual beforehand, and so they were trying to work out what sexual positions they could do now, what works. I mean, it's very focused on men, but the story that I always hear is that when men come out of a coma or they're in the rehab units, they want to know if it works. They want to know
Mm.
if they have sexual functioning, how it works. I've certainly professionally been involved in interactions with clients where before people wanted to use medical interventions, they wanted to find a baseline to see if individuals' genitals had any kind of arousal, if they had any feelings, sensations, if they could ejaculate. And so, once again, sex workers can provide this very unique kind of service to be able to work in a really sensual, respectful, controlled, and safe environment to be able to support individual sexual needs.
I think one of the things that I see come through in using sex work as an intervention for that cohort that are trying to learn what works, what doesn't work, what do I like, how does my body respond? You nailed it into the talk about safety and that this is an environment where you can experiment. There's no such thing as failure, and I put that in inverted commas, because there's a lot of anxiety about going into informal dating or informal sexual partners where you've got the
Mm.
anxiety of your sexual partner to manage, or you've got the lack of skills from maybe inexperienced sexual partner. One of the things that sex workers can offer is confidence, while somebody learns about their own body. And then in learning their own body, they're then able to teach a new lover. And so it's almost for some like a practice ground or a training ground to then take those skills and use them in other areas of their life. No different to how we might simulate transfers in the unit, or we teach driving skills in simulated cars before you get on the road. I think it's just one of those areas of rehabilitation that we don't often think, well, how do you get hands-on experience and simulation experience like we do in so many other ADLs, like in activities of daily living? For some, sex work is part of that treating team to be able to start to explore what that might look like for them post-injury.
Totally. So, to increase sexual literacy is
Mm,
the summary of what you've just said. And that was for many different participants. For some, it was about losing their virginity in that kind of traditional sense of the
yeah,
word. And that was different age groups as well, from 18 up to 30s or 40s.
yeah.
But people wanted to explore touch with another person in that safe manner. And for many people, it really was that we were the safe practice runs to increase someone's sense of self, their sense of confidence to be able to start dating. So there were a number of survey participants who said, when they answered the question, "Are you still seeing a sex worker?" There were a
Mm,
number of them that said no.
mhm.
And so I asked a subsequent question about, why don't you? And for a number of people, they said, because I now have a partner or a girlfriend or a boyfriend. One participant had gotten married. I have to say that I'm really delighted that one of my interviewees spoke about their experiences in, losing their kind of traditional virginity with a sex worker, did lots of private one-on-one interactions behind closed doors, but they also did a lot of kind of simulated dating. They went to the theatre or they went to shows or the movies, and so they had kind of faux dates,
Mhm.
what you would see two people just out and about. There were lots of dinner date discussions. One of my interviewees went on to start dating, learnt about what they liked, what they didn't like, how they could communicate that with a future partner, started dating, and is now engaged, which
Yeah,
is a really delightful
and you
outcome.
can see the capacity building that sex work can offer in terms of, interpersonal relationships. And NDIS loves capacity building. So I don't know sometimes what their problem is. Sex work,
Mm.
because I'm like,
Yeah.
if that's not an example of how to build capacity for developing informal relationships and quality of life outcomes, then I don't know what is. But
I'm literally writing that section now, in that one of the greatest fears of previous NDIS ministers that has been publicly spoken about is the fear that if you include sex work services into the NDIS, that everyone will want it all of the time and that it will be overused and misused. But the reality is that what my findings are showing is that people do not want to see sex workers every week. So I did ask participants that I interviewed about how often they would like to see a sex worker and for how long each session was. And I can tell you it's not every week. It really aligns with other client behaviors from the literature, from like clients in general. But it's not every week. And as my findings show, people don't want it for the rest of their lives. There's lots of people who utilize the services of sex workers for very specific reasons, to be able to go on and enjoy their life and feel really good about themselves. Some people
yeah.
may want to see sex workers for the rest of their lives, and that's a very individual reason. But once again, if the NDIS is supposed to be person centered and we're supposed to ask each individual what they specifically need, then we need to listen to their voices. So I'm hoping that this PhD and the findings that emerge from it will be able to expand these discussions and to really highlight the voices of people with disability.
And add a little bit of like reality testing too, that it's not whatever assumptions people are making. And I feel like sex work is one of those areas that has a lot of myths and a lot of assumptions and presumptions. And this evidence is kind of saying, well, actually, the reality is we're talking about a certain time point with a certain goal and certain skills to be acquired. And that is fundamentally what the NDIS
Mm.
does. They ask, what's your goal? How are we going to help you achieve it? And what are the supports that you need to be able to achieve it? So hopefully with a bit of time, the NDIS will come on board with understanding this is just another therapeutic intervention, and legal and culturally, we're working and living in Australia right now. So all of those concerns can be relayed. But
I have to say that one of the big focus points, obviously, on the NDIS at the moment is how much money is being wasted. And I can tell your audience right now, one of the areas where a lot of money is wasted is on having lawyers and barristers represent the NDIS and also represent participants at the AAT, at the tribunal, or having to go to the federal court instead of just believing them. And there's so many times where my clients and your clients as well, and sometimes our mutual clients, thousands of dollars are being written on reports about these individuals without the individual's voice actually being front and center. Sex work still being denied in people's plans, even though the participant has already been seeing a sex worker. There's already been lots of evidence to show how it's improved their mood, the behaviors of concern, people's sleep, people's confidence, people's mobility, sexual functioning. There are lots of different reasons, but you would save a ton of money if you just believe us. So I'm hoping once again that I will be able to participate in these discussions.
We could have spent a year's worth of sex work on the time it spent to fight it. Maybe even 10 years worth of sex work in the time it spent to fight it, to be honest, depending on the barrister. But if there's someone listening who is curious about seeing sex work and maybe haven't explored it yet, what's your tip for people who are exploring sex work for the first time?
Well, first of all, it would be about thinking about which gender or genders you would like to see and to explore different sexual activities with. Think about the age range, think about your personal experience or your personal situation of if you're living at home, are you going to be able to have a sex worker visit you there, or are you going to have to look for someone who provides services outside of your residence? Have a little Google search.
Google search what search terms?
Things like Sydney escort female disability is a general thing. The touching base referral list inquiry form is online. They have a number of different members who are sex workers who have provided their work details to say that they are willing and able to see people with disability. So you can fill out that form. There's a whole heap of questions there that will help you think about the information that is needed to be able to find a sex worker, hopefully in your area. I'm available, but obviously there's lots of people with work names, so work websites, email address, phone number. Then that form will say what area, and you can say the Brisbane area or Sunshine Coast area. And so there will be a list of sex workers who may operate in that area, but there also may be a number of different other sex workers who have indicated that they tour or travel to that area.
Yep. So someone's found a website. They've thought, oh, okay, maybe I'm curious about seeing that person. And then what's your tips for making contact? So that way the first contact is a successful start to that working relationship.
My first point is read the website. Do not just look at the photos and find the phone number and then text them and say hi. That will annoy all of us. It does not bode well. Think about if you are organizing an appointment with a dentist. So I'd ring up and I'd say, hi, it's Rachel. I'm looking to book the dentist for a general once a year checkup. I'm looking for an appointment on Thursday or Friday in the next couple of weeks, generally between 11 and 3. Do you have any appointments available? So what
Cool.
I've given is the services I'm looking for, the preferred dates and time range, and my name. The amount of requests or texts or emails that we get from all kinds of clients without someone's name is astounding. It obviously, if someone is with disability, then a little bit of information about you is very good because informed consent goes both ways. So not all sex workers feel comfortable seeing anyone with disability. I certainly have friends and colleagues who only feel comfortable and confident in seeing people with physical disabilities, but people with psychosocial disabilities, intellectual disabilities, cognitive disabilities, they don't feel quite as confident. And so that's their line. And
Yep.
they're perfectly entitled to that. Just like every sex worker, they don't do everything. We specialize or prefer to provide certain services, and every individual sex worker is different. So you need to be able to check their website or their advertisement to see what they offer. Use Google search engines to find out what an acronym may be. That would be the starting point. So saying, hi, I have cerebral palsy is a good start.
Mm.
However, what I really need is I need to know how that affects your mobility, your communication, and maybe your sexual functioning. They're the three areas. I also need to know if there will be a support worker bringing you to the booking, or if there will be a support worker that will open the door if you're wanting me to arrive at your place, things like that. Because informed consent, like I said, goes both ways. So sex workers don't want to be suddenly surprised by seeing a third person. We're used to interacting just 101 with the client.
Mhm.
So you say, I'd like you to come and see me at 5 p.m. on Thursday at my place, and you don't tell me anything about yourself. And then
Mm.
I turn up and there's this other person who answers the door, and you've booked as Jim. And I'm like, hi, Jim. They're like, no, I'm Callum. I'm the support worker. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
I haven't given consent to see this other person. And so therefore, and you've outed me to another person without me knowing. I have to give consent to that. Obviously, there needs to be improvements in terms of accessible workplaces for people to be able to visit. So learning and you telling the sex worker about what your access needs are really important. And, communication is 101. Consent and communication are the baseline of how really good, fun sex worker bookings occur, really.
Mm.
So if someone is very sensitive to smells, then to say, hey, can you just make sure that there's, you don't use hairspray or you don't have candles on when I visit because, I'm very sensitive to different kinds of smells. If someone is coming and utilizes a wheelchair, then letting me know if you have an electric or manual wheelchair is always good. Do you need a hoist? Will the support worker be coming with you to be able to transfer you? If people have colostomy bags, totally fine. People just need to know about it. Obviously, the things that people need to do is to have a shower beforehand. Even when people are supporting an individual, it'd be like, oh, yeah, they've showered. And if it's a 4 p.m. booking and someone gets showered at 7 in the morning,
It's like not having
that's
a
not
shower.
good for their dignity. Yeah, someone's been sitting around all day. We want to treat people with dignity and respect, and that goes both ways. It's perfectly fine if people have adult incontinence pads, bring a spare. You have to let us know beforehand. Negotiating things like who will be doing transfers, who will be dressing and undressing, all those kind of communication
Mm.
kind of needs have to happen beforehand. But once you get through all of that, then we can just have a really fun time. But yeah, don't ever do the hi or like, hey, babe, because you'll be ignored.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So what I hear there is more information, the better. And that kind of just sets the whole booking up for success, like you would any other medical or allied health appointment, in terms of making sure that the person has all the information they need to get the most out of that appointment. So,
There's a few other considerations that are very unique to a person with disability that we may need to know. And they are, if people are taking medications, then be aware about what time of day the booking may occur. You can't
mm,
imagine how many times it's like, oh yeah, we're bringing Johnny at 12 noon. I'm like, that's great. And then, 12:30, halfway through an hour appointment, their alarm goes off. And I'm like, what is that for? And they're like, oh, I have to take medication. I'm like,
yeah, right now.
okay, I can get it out of the bag and I can hand it to you. But, we're kind of stopping this, very
Mm,
fun, sexy time for someone to have medication. But also, if medication affects someone and someone gets tired, or we know some medications may upset someone's tummy, then you don't want a booking after medication. You want the booking before the medication, well before. I had one client once, we were just waiting for their support worker to pick them up after a lovely hour. And I said, what are you doing this afternoon? And this gentleman said, oh, I have to get home. I have to take medication. I was like, what's the medication for and what time
mhm.
do you normally take it? This was actually at noon. And they said, well, normally I take my medication at noon. And I was like, what is the medication? They were like, oh, anti-seizure medication. And so
Oh,
I was like, we are changing the appointment time next time. And I rang the house manager and just said, that's too important. You either need to
yeah.
have that in the car. You can't muck around with anesthesia medication by an hour because they're driving along a freeway that's not looking after the medical needs of the individual.
Yeah, so let's think through some logistics here around what's practical in an appointment and the best timing. And I think like so I would add to that too around bowel care as well. Like if your bowel routine's in the morning, then book an appointment after rather than before. Just trying to maximize all of the things to go
Mm.
as successfully as possible. And I think some of what you just talked about there probably is, for any of the health professionals who are listening today who maybe are supporting clients with booking, it's the same deal, right? Like reach out. Lots of information's good. An email to introduce the client is always good, or a phone call. Is there any other tips that you have
Mm.
for health professionals who might be considering supporting clients for the first time and they've never done it before?
Yes, I have quite a few. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you publicly to all the amazing support workers and allied health and family members who have gone above and beyond and have really supported my clients' individual needs. I know it's very difficult. It's a brave new world for a lot of different people, and I understand that these conversations are very difficult the first time, but many people have been very willing to be led through this process and to learn along the way. So everything that I always share comes from these kind of interactions, both the good and the bad. So one of the first things I would say is people often contact sex workers before they've had a conversation with the individual. So
Oh,
often it's like, I had one yesterday of, hi, I'm ringing because I've been given your number and someone's interested in seeing a sex worker. So I go through the how old is the person, what gender is the person, sexual services is the person looking for, has that person seen a sex worker before? And they're like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. And I'm like,
wow.
we need to have these conversations. Yeah. So is this person verbal? Do they communicate over the phone? Are they comfortable doing that? They're like, "Yeah, why is that person not speaking to me themselves?"
Yeah.
If they're shy or nervous or not confident, then I'm very happy to set up an appointment where you call when they're in the room and then you're on speaker. But people often kind of put the cart before the horse and
Mm,
try to reach out to sex workers without that, which is kind of labor intensive. So people think, oh, it's just one conversation. But if I'm doing that 5 times a day,
yeah.
and then there's lots of sex workers having the same conversation. So you need to get the ducks in the line beforehand. Lots of people don't know whether anyone's had sex education. They're like, oh, I'm not sure. I'm like, do they know how to use a condom? Have they masturbated before? Have they had any sexual experience? They have to have these hard questions before they get to us. I can teach someone how to put a condom on. Lots of sex workers can. People don't realize that there's different size condoms. Different brands are slightly different. One of the questions I often ask, especially with someone with spina bifida, people are allergic to latex. And
Uh-huh.
so many support workers or NDIS coordinators, I say, do you know if a person is allergic to latex? They're like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, well, you really need to, because we're not having anaphylactic shock on my bed.
Yeah.
We're going to find this out well beforehand. And it's also good to set them up for life. So they may only see me once, to learn how to put a condom on or to experience what oral sex is like or anything like that, or to learn how to do all sorts of different things. But if they know that they are allergic to latex, then they can buy non-latex condoms and certain kind of lube so
And
that they
and be
can start
safe.
dating, be
Yeah.
safe and healthy and happy down the track. So they're the kind of things that you need to think about before you contact us. One of the big things with support persons or any allied health that are contacting sex workers is that we know that a lot of the times, if you're calling from an organization, you have a blocked number, and sex workers
Oh,
do not answer blocked numbers now.
good
So
point.
you need to text and say, "Hi, can I call you at a certain time?" Often people are like, "Can you call us?" And that's something that's actually the sex workers, shouldn't be doing that. We wait for the clients to contact us generally. And so it is one of those things people say, "Oh, well, you won't answer." It's like, well, it's a block number.
Yep.
And that goes back to reading the website or reading the advertisements. So sex workers like to be contacted in a myriad of different ways. So some people prefer text but not call. Some people prefer email and that's the only way. So people need to follow and be guided by how the sex worker likes to interact. And if that means the sex worker is not suitable for the individual because they like to communicate a different way, then so be it. Or if you reach out in the manner that the sex worker prefers, then maybe they will make an exception due to the individual nature of the client.
Mm.
But you can't get annoyed if you're not
Yeah.
following the procedure. Every sex worker has different procedures in terms of out calls and in calls. So to be clear, an in call is when you visit the sex worker at their private workspace, and an out call means the sex worker goes to visit the client, whether that's in their home, whether that's in a hotel, that's an out call. So out calls are more expensive because it involves travel time and travel costs as well. Just to let your audience know what the difference is. These terms developed from the sex workers, not from the client's perspective. People
Yeah.
get very confused. And it's
True.
also good to, if you're contacting sex workers who do travel around Australia, then to be really clear where you are. So I've often said, where are you calling from? And they'll be like, Newtown. Now, the problem is there's a Newtown in Hobart and there's a Newtown in
Oh,
Sydney.
good
So
point. Good point.
there's been 1 or 2 times appointments have nearly been made in the wrong state.
Oh,
So,
whoops. Yeah.
yeah.
I think the
So,
thing I would add
yeah,
to the client list as well is like to go through the websites with your client. Like when I'm supporting people to see a sex worker, we look at photos. Yeah, expectations are being set as well. And I have a conversation with my clients around what the expectations are from sex work because sometimes they're really unrealistic. And sometimes they have no idea at all. So it's really important to kind of talk through all the details so that way people are really calm going into it and they're not unnecessarily stressed or worried or anxious. That would be my additional tip to anyone who's looking to help support one. Was there anything there that we missed?
Yes, be really clear about supporting the sex worker's privacy and confidentiality. So I know that sometimes support workers or people working in the disability sector or people with disability themselves often feel very invisible. But when you're entering, especially residential locations where individual sex workers may work from a rented workspace or they may work from home, that their neighbours may not know them by the name that you know them by. And I know that sometimes support workers are very proud that they're supporting people for this very unique kind of service and that the individual clients may be very excited about this appointment. But it does not benefit anyone by saying, "Hi, Jenny, like Michael's so excited about seeing you. He hasn't stopped talking about you since the last appointment." And that will freak the sex worker out.
Yeah.
Just be very quiet, very respectful. Don't do any debriefing at the cafe around the corner because, friends and neighbours may be there. Do the debriefing in the car on the way home. The individual wants to speak about the service or the booking, but just be very aware to be very quiet and confidential and to follow the procedures that the sex workers have said. I have very clear procedures that I like the support worker or whoever's driving my client to my workspace that you need to text when you're leaving their home. So I know you haven't forgotten about the appointment. I know how long generally it takes. And then when someone parks in the street, they text me or call me to make sure it's okay. Don't just assume and rock up at the door. Sex workers are actually really good at time management. So if it's an 11 a.m. appointment, don't rock up at 10:30 and think that's great. On the other hand, if there's traffic, don't think that you can rock up at 11:40 and still get an hour appointment. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
The client will need to leave at 12 o'clock unless you've pre-organized something and said, "Look, there's been a car accident on the M4. I'm really sorry. Is it possible that we can put back the appointment today?" And that gives the individual sex worker time to work out the rest of their day. As we
Yeah.
like to say, we're not just lying around in our lingerie waiting for you and only you. We have a life. We're parents, we're at university, we have other clients, we may have other engagements, we may be getting ready to go to someone's birthday party. There's a multitude of things that could be filling our day. We're
Yeah.
not just seeing you for the day, even though you'd like to believe that.
Now, Rachel, we could talk all day long, and we do.
Yeah.
But I'm going to bring us to a close today because I think we've covered an enormous amount of things, which I hope have been useful for folks who are kind of thinking about maybe seeing a sex worker, maybe supporting someone to see a sex worker, or even just kind of thinking around, well, what role does sex work play in this landscape? I'm sure we've given people lots of things to think about. And I just want to say a huge thank you for your wisdom, your time, and also your commitment, like to be doing this for so many years and to still be pursuing new novel areas, and your contribution is massive. So thank you for your work and for your time today. Wish you a lovely afternoon as you go on to do whatever else is planned in your afternoon.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you as always. I guess if your audience had any further questions about sex work, if they send them to you, and then I can maybe chat to you again and answer all the questions.
Yeah, cool. We'll do it like that. That's a good way. Yep. So if anyone has sex work questions that we haven't already covered today, by all means, reach out to us and we will endeavour to answer all the sex work questions in the future. Lovely. All right. Well, thanks, Rachel. What a massive thanks to Rachel for her time today. We've reflected on a variety of themes here, and I hope this conversation has allowed you to have an understanding of the number of supports that sex workers provide people who might be interested in using their services. If you've enjoyed today's episode or any of the really good sex chats, please consider sharing this podcast with a friend or rate it on Spotify so others can find it too. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.